conflict and resolution. And the very first project that Bob Staples and I worked on with our newly independent firm that started in 1973 was We the People for the Smithsonian. And it was a huge exhibit. It was 15,000 square feet, and it had funding from Congress. And this actually is a letter written by Ben Lawless, who was head of exhibits, and he's writing it to Victor Lundy, who's an architect and his friend. And he's basically saying, we've got all this money, and the exhibit office can control how it's spent. He can choose any architect or designer, he says that we want. And he wants Victor. Well, Victor obviously turns him down. And the next year, I was working around the Smithsonian, freelancing, and Ben asked me if I had any ideas of designers, and I mentioned that I thought Bob wanted to leave the Eames office, and Ben jumped at the chance and hired basically Bob, and I came with the program. Ben, in terms of thinking through the exhibit as head of exhibits, initially did a model himself. And on the left is his model and his idea of people protesting on the Capitol steps. The exhibit had three parts: of the people, by the people, and for the people. And by the people was all about campaigning, voting, protesting. And on the right, and I don't have a pointer, but on the right where the arrow is, was the section in the hall that had very high ceilings and had the space to do something large about the protests. It's a little bit now an anachronism because, one, you can't protest on the Capitol steps. Two, almost nothing happens on the east side because they put in the visitor center there. All the activity now, inaugurals, et cetera, are on the west side. And three, I think since the January 6th activities, to use a euphemism, I don't think the Smithsonian even would probably take on doing something about the Capitol steps. This was our first model. So we took Ben's idea, but a couple of things we've done. One, we've really said it ought to be a straight-on view of the Capitol. And then we've added a proscenium around it, and our idea was much like 19th century kind of old opera house stages that had advertisements around it. We would put quotes around it, including the First Amendment at the top. Each of the figures would be photographs of protesters, but they would be carrying real banners from the collections. So it seems like a pretty straightforward, easy idea. So we have to do the setting, we have to do the mannequins, we have to do the posters and banners, figure them out, and the quotations. And this is only one part of the show, but this was sort of known, so it was the first section we attacked quickly. So first was getting the right photograph. And we needed to get it before winter set in, and because we were going to start getting the big backdrop painted early the next year. Anybody know what happened that's so important on our country on October 20th, 1973? Well, to take a picture on the Capitol with a tripod and a 4x5 camera, but any tripod, you have to get permission. So if you're on the left side, you get the Speaker of the House. If you're on the right side, you get the head of the Senate. But if you're dead center like we wanted to be, you go to the Vice President's office in the Capitol to get the permission. So Rick, our photographer, was watching the weather. It has to be early in the morning, so the east sun is on the Capitol. So he goes to the Vice President's office, lugging his tripod, all his stuff. And they look at him and they say, "We can't sign it." Spiro Agnew resigned that morning. So Rick goes, "Oh my God, my boss, me, is going to be really upset." So they said, "Well, just go in Agnew's office and use the phone." So he sat in the office and called me. But they also said, "You have to go to the Speaker of the House's office. They're next in line." So he hauled his equipment, went over there, and got the sign off and got the photograph. So when we sent it all out to Duncan Spencer, who was this great Hollywood scenic designer, we not only sent the big black and white photograph, which by the time it was done, Bob had sort of chopped and channeled the Capitol dome to lower it, but we sent out color photographs, so the dome actually looked more like that. We sent out details, you know, for the steps, for flags, all kinds of things to get it. So that gets in the works. Meanwhile, we're trying to collect our photographic people. Well, we could get suffragettes, but for these people, the quality of the photograph had to be good enough that we could blow it up almost life size, and they had to be free enough from everybody else that you could trim them out and get them. So we got 3 suffragettes, the one lady on the right, the middle lady on the right, and the left, but we couldn't find anybody else. We went to photo agencies, we just looked and looked, and nothing was working. So we looked in our own collections. I had been out when the Native Americans took over the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I went out and photographed. So the 2 of the left, we had now some Indians at least protesting. And in my merry-go-round collection, for those of you who know I did a lot of that photography, this wonderful gentleman who was a carousel operator in Ohio seemed like he would work, stepping off a step. And Rick had been photographing around Harvard Square, so he had this pair that could carry a great big banner. Then Rick started photographing. Well, in 1973 and early 1974, luckily for us, maybe not for the nation, there were demonstrations in Washington, anti-Vietnam, anti-Nixon. I mean, you could just keep going to demonstrations. The trick still was to get independent people, you know, not overlaid. So these are all people he got. The black lady on the left who's barefoot, this probably a nice white lady with her back to us, a Chicano, and this wonderful middle-aged woman on the right. And Bob even went to the Capitol steps and just started photographing people going into the Capitol on their own business, trying to get people in the right poses. And Edie Mayo, then looking at all the banners they had, she came up, gave us a list of banners they had, which we would then photograph in black and white. And then she also says on this list, you know, signs that would be nice to have: aggressive graphics, anti-war, farm workers, radical black rights, you know, you can read it, contemporary women's, Indian rights, youth vote, pro-war. And then she makes kind of the understatement of the year, I think, and absolutely contemporary issues that may retain some modernity through 1980. Abortion, amnesty, energy crunch, prisoners of war, Israeli Arab, impeachment, conservation, economic problem. So she, beg your pardon?
We solved all those.
Yeah, right. So besides the poster she already had, she started trying to contact certain groups and get things that they didn't necessarily have, or go out to the demonstrations and just, you know, collect. Well, they did have 2 banners. The one on the left is Funds for Life, Not Death, and this big Veterans of War one. I apologize, a lot of my banner and poster pictures are black and white, because that's how we photographed them, always with a ruler, and then we could scale them up and down, you know, for our exhibits, so they're not in color. And we would make up these sheets with the people that we thought could carry it and the banner for review. So our barefooted black woman, we had some choices of posters from CORE. And the woman on the right, these are anti-busing, from an anti-busing demonstration. There's actually, much like was said yesterday in the talks, there's not a lot of pro-war material. There's not a lot of, let's say, groups more to the right. You know, material is harder to find. But we did have anti-busing. And the Chicano man, we had a boycott grapes, but the museum also had this large banner, so we gave him the banner. And the woman on the right, Edie really wanted to do something with the Women's Strike for Peace group, which was, Bella Agzug is one of the founders, and Edie just felt it was a really important group. So she was given "War is not healthy for business and children and other living things." And it was really a poster used in a demonstration up in Baltimore to try to convince businesses to join the anti-war movement. On the left here again, we have our woman from the Capitol, and she was first choice. Second choice was a black woman with an afro. And, you know, equality in law and life, promotions, not proposals, but also all equal rights for women material. Well, then we began to review our material with Margaret Klapthor, who was the senior curator, had been at the museum forever. She's the one who started the First Lady's gowns. And she wrote a long memo after reviewing things. So she likes this young man that Rick had photographed. But we initially suggested that he just carry the photograph he had, his sign as a photograph. And she said, no, let's use one from the poster. So he'll carry "End the Draft, support the men who say no." But Margaret didn't want amnesty. It was to be deleted, so we couldn't use any of these amnesty ones. I love this type on the lower two. And she wants a bonus marcher. Well, we went through photographs and couldn't find any bonus marchers that would work. But Rick did photograph this man who was a veteran of Vietnam War, unemployed, and using a slogan from the 30s, you know, "Brother, can you spare a dime?" And there were several people, and ultimately Edie collected their box, and all of these are in the Smithsonian collection now. I love, obviously, the same person writing them all, but the variations are quite fun. And Margaret wanted for economic, a man carrying the trucker sign should be middle-aged and middle American. Well, I'm not sure this man on the left necessarily would like to be a trucker. His sign said in reality, "Jail to the chief." So he was at an anti-Nixon rally. And we gave him the sign that's on the left, "Truckers ask why cap domestic oil wells." Stencils were really big for posters during this period. And the one on the right, if you can read it, the lower right, is "There's no gas ration for B-52s." My merry-go-round man seemed perfect for a large NAACP Target Freedom sign. And Margaret said, "The figures of the black rights section must all be black people of distinctly late 50s or early 60s vintage." So he seemed right. And the "I Am a Man" sign was to be from the 68 it's from the garbage workers' strike, where Martin Luther King was killed. And Margaret doesn't want anybody to have an afro or mod clothing. So no Stokely Carmichaels, no Angela Davis. And this man who obviously was protesting the Vietnam War, and the poster to the left is similar to one he's holding. It's in the collections now, but it wasn't then. But he was given the "I Am a Man" sign. And there wouldn't be any impeachment material. That was not to be used. So all of these signs we could not use. I really love the whole handmade use of them. So here's the show beginning to go together. That's probably Bob and the guy to the left. The big murals going in, and the figures are slowly going together. The figures even the front ones were not quite life-size, but then we did sort of force perspective, so they get smaller as they go back, which meant we had to watch what size signs we were giving them. And once they all got fixed up, then we started placing them around the steps to make sure the vistas were good. And we started working on the quotes, and Edie Mayo and I struggled on these for about 3 days. Always, this money was from Congress, and Smithsonian in general is supported by Congress. So throughout this, we were perfectly aware that we may be getting into trouble. So Martin Luther King quote was used, but not Malcolm X. We also had limited space, and we're trying to balance everything. Hell No, We Won't Go, we did use, but Make Love, Not War, we didn't. Sisterhood is Powerful is on the yes side, Uppity Women Unite not. So you get a sense that we're trying to get ones that balance. And we never did find any Indian ones that made sense. There's always in the vein at that period of Custer died for your sins. And the communist slogan, workers of the world unite, didn't make the cut. So here's the final steps all together. And you can see some of the various people, our Brother Can You Spare a Dime guys out front, the NAAC target, with the quotes all around it. And as visitors walked around, they could see the people that are in the back, and they could also look up and you'd see the full Capitol. But as I said, chopped and channeled a little bit. And this is just stepping back a little bit. There was right in front of that, of the big protest area, was an area about campaigning. And all around it in the case was a band that Bob laid out of about 50 feet of political memorabilia. Quite incredible. And the press was really universally good, and everybody really liked the By the People. That was the one section of the show that the press always pointed out. And this woman also is talking about how long some of these issues have been going on. Everything was fine. We had one issue. Let me go back up. Oh, I can't. Yeah, back up a second. There was one issue on one of the quotes. Somebody wrote and said that resistance to tyranny, I'm blanking on it, is obedience to God. The Jefferson quote should be rebellion to tyranny. And the person was right. You know, you're always glad somebody actually reads these things, and the Smithsonian answered back, or Edie did, the curator, that yes, it's getting corrected. But then this letter arrived about 14 months after we had opened from Sarah Beach. I would have been honored to have been immortalized in this esteemed institution had my viewpoint not been completely distorted. You can imagine the ripple effect of this letter. And where do we get the photographs? How was this all done? To declare that war is not healthy for children is at best a cynical understatement. In addition, I take objection to the statement that war is not healthy for business. Businesses traditionally are the greatest beneficiaries of war. Well, we got, you know, Edie's has to talk to us. Where did we get the photographs? You know, who, did we get any rights? You can't get rights at a demonstration. She has to write to the director of the museum. I mean, ultimately, Ben, who just said, Edie, write to Sarah Beach. You know, woo her. See if we can keep her. We all loved her. So this is Sarah Beach right here, this lady, with her bags and everything else. Well, it took about 2 months to do the response, but Edie ultimately does write to Sarah and just starts wooing her and saying, you know, we love your mannequin. We've had many compliments on it. We don't want to misrepresent your philosophical position. They'd be happy to change the poster. Edie is still advocating for the Women's Strike for Peace, and she wants to use the war is not healthy for children and other living things. But if that really won't work, would Sarah Beach please donate a poster of her own making? Well, it took about another month to work this all out, but Sarah agrees to donate, and these are two of the posters that she donated. I think she donated just two. But these are Sarah Beach's own posters. She always made her own posters. And Edie got talking somehow to her grandson, who was a law student at Georgetown, and he said, oh yeah, she protests every weekend. I mean, that's what she does, you know.
That's cool.
And then Sarah said that she was coming to Washington for Jimmy Carter's inaugural, and she wanted to see how the poster had been changed. She agreed to the Women Strike for Peace poster. So she came into the exhibit, and the Smithsonian photographer, somehow they got her into the exhibit. And this is Sarah standing next to her own mannequin.
Oh, that's cool.
So that's our conflict, that's our resolution. Thank you. I'll take questions, or you all just might want to get out of here. Yeah, you have Jeopardy. I think that's fine.
Well, do we have any questions?
Any questions? One question back, yes.
The woman you referred to as Margaret,
Margaret Clapthorpe?
okay, it just seems to me, looking back, that she wielded a lot of clout. One person did in the control of what could and could not happen at the exhibit. Can you comment on that? Is that?
Well, Margaret was the senior curator. And so she's going to get the veto power on anything in that exhibit. It's the Political History Hall. And she's also probably had, Edie was pretty young. I was fairly young. I mean, we were pretty much on the leftist side. Margaret probably was reading the whole temperature of the situation, better than we were in terms of no impeachment pieces and so on. So that would be pretty typical that, you would do your work and you'd send it up to your supervisor to be reviewed. So I wouldn't say it was unusual, but she was one of the more powerful curators at that museum at that time. Over here, I saw.
We now, some of us worry about how AI and other things can change the words and the meaning and the reality of things we read and see. Do you feel any pangs about how you all were changing the signs and changing what people?
Yeah, I mean,
Does that seem a little wrong?
what I was actually had meant to start out by saying, every exhibit, first of all, is political. I don't care what it is, whether, Islamic shows when they're being done now and so on. So that's one thing for you all to think about. But yeah, there are ethical issues here. That we were aware that we were giving people different signs, but we also had to get the job done, So, it was really hard to find the good mannequins, good people, good photographs. So, yeah, there are ethical issues there. And
Why couldn't they just use the signs they had?
we did use this. You mean that the people were carrying in the demonstrations? It's hard enough to get the picture of the person, let alone collect their sign. That's very difficult. So yes, there are some ethical issues. I can't answer it more than that. But the only one that was collected actually at a demonstration was the box. Brother, can you spare a dime? I think all the others, at least from the person carrying it, all the others, either the museum had or Edie collected at demonstrations, but not necessarily, or for any of the others, from the person who we had ultimately hold it. Yeah. Yes?
Did you ever meet or hear from any of the others who were pictured?
No, that's the only one we ever heard from. There was general letters to the museum that mentioned the exhibit were probably 80% pro or 90% pro. There were one or two letters that people feeling that it had too much of a leftist bent, but as I mentioned, it's very, very hard to find good, more conservative material at that period. It's not to say now you couldn't, but then, there weren't that many demonstrations on the pro side.
Question.
Yeah.
Were you and Bob working as contractors? Did you have a contract from a federal agency?
On this particular exhibit, it was a design-build contract, and when Ben Lawless wanted Bob to be the designer, Bob then paired up with a studio in New York called Display Studios that had built a lot of the exhibits for the Eames office and had built things, for instance, at the New York World's Fair. And so Display Studios actually had the contract.
Thank you.
Yes, David.
Building on the question of the manipulation of the image.
I don't have a microphone, or stand up and turn around and say it, I guess.
Just try to speak louder.
but face that way.
Building on the question of manipulation of the image, and then your answer about there were ethical issues, was there a disclaimer that was included in here that said things have been changed?
Well, we change
Or disclosure?
the change. We didn't change the people. We gave them different signs. No, there was no disclosure. Yeah.
Wasn't litigious as it is now.
Yeah. Both the well, certainly in the National Archives. I don't know if the Library of Congress got in trouble for this. More recently, during the Trump administration, airbrushed out some anti-Trump material in a photograph and got called on it totally. Yeah. Or I don't know if anybody airbrushes now, but whatever they did. Okay. Who? Mari?
Do you know the reason that why the Michelangelo turned out as this photo?
Oh, he's not an exhibit designer. I mean, it would have been a disaster if he. I don't mean that way. It's just dealing with all of this. We had 1,000 artifacts in this exhibit. You know, so it's not what his office was set up to do.
I was wondering if he was busy with that passport design stuff at that time.
I don't know. That could be too, that he was very busy anyway, but you know, he was Ben's friend. I think Ben was also using that. If he wouldn't do it, who could he recommend? You know, because it was, that letter's December, it was sometime maybe 4 or 6 months later when Ben talked to me. Yes?
Yeah, you said early on that, or I read it, I guess, 500,000 budgeted and I think 250,000 supplemental.
Well, that's in Ben's letter. In the press that went out when we opened it, they just said 500,000. So I don't know if there was actually more money.
Did that require that much, or did you have to get a supplement or give them their change?
Well, we didn't get that money.
The contractor got the money.
But there was,
Not that I didn't
yeah, but the
think you-
500,000 is not going to all go to the fabricator. I mean, there's going to be mount makers the museum is hiring. There's, you know, all kinds. They did a lot of work internally. I've never found, I've tried to find, I haven't found the original contract that Display Studios had. So we didn't give any money back. Display Studios got paid whatever they were contracted for.
You know, I'm just saying, I don't have a realistic sense of what an enterprise like that would cost, and I find it very interesting to know if someday somebody wants me to put up an exhibition, and I say, I need $500,000.
Well,
I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
I can talk to you offline about this because they can go from here to here. I mean, a painting show is $10 a square foot, last I know, whereas what we did at Monticello was $1,000 a square foot. So,
We need to keep.
yeah.